And we are live. Dr. Sula, the floor is yours.
Welcome everyone to the Data Science and AI Speaker Series event. And we are kicking the first series event for spring 2023 with Jason Brooks, the CEO of Harkness.ai. The Speaker Series event's mission for Data and AI in our program is to invite key people from data and AI and industry and talk to our students about the importance of building products with AI and ethical and all the AI with good impact in our society. I would like to invite as moderator for this session, Dr. Bezadan, who is the professor at the Tagliatella College of Engineering and our sales lab director. Thank you, Jason, and we are eager and happy to have you here today, and our students are going to learn a lot about Harkness.ai and your mission. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So as a moderator, I'm going to put down a couple of rules of engagement. This is going to be a conversation, and this aims to be a venue for students to learn more about what's happening in the data science industry, in the AI industry, and to learn from experiences of experts and leaders like Jason. We're going to start with a few preliminary questions and a flow of like discussion, and then we'll open the floor to questions from students. Please note that this is being recorded and will be released on our YouTube channel. And without further ado, Jason, I'd like to extend a welcome to you as well. Thank you very much for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about your background? What led you to this leadership position and to Harkness.ai?
Sure. Thanks for having me again. It's good to see you all. I'm getting like the very vivid memories of the early days of the pandemic, where I was met with this very scene, right? You got students who are all over the world, all over the place, all signing in. So it's fantastic to come back in. But originally I'm from South Central LA. So I'm from Watts, born and raised in the late 80s, early 90s, which was a really rough time in that neighborhood's history. So a lot of police brutality, a lot of gang violence, a lot of drugs, like all the things that you would see in that environment. And then I got really, really lucky because in my home, I had amazing parents. My dad was a cop here in Glendale for 25 years, and my mom was a teacher. So inside of my home, there were very strict rules and a lot of order and a lot of love. And education was really placed at a high premium. So from there, I literally remember this like it's yesterday. I was playing basketball on a weekend. My mom grabbed me off the court and took me and made me take a test. And I was like, but Mom, I want to finish. She was like, get in the car. And I was like, okay. So then we rode across LA, and then I sat down and took a test. I didn't know then, but it was an entrance exam to get into an all-boys school here in California, out by the Claremont colleges. So in a summer, I went from like the hood to Hogwarts. So it was like an all boys boarding school. You've got a shirt and tie, a formal dinner. There are more forks, knives, and spoons on the table than we had in our house. I mean, people were eating from the outside in. There's so many dishes, and that's totally new environment. But there, I was exposed to really high octane teachers and really amazing classmates. And we sat in discussion around the Harkness table. And the Harkness method is a teaching method that goes back 100 years, where there's a philanthropist who said, students are smart. I don't need them to teach them to be smart. If I just get them in conversation and ask really good questions and teach them how to ask each other questions, we will all learn. So it's really interesting to see 100 years ago, 200 years, even going back to the time of Socrates, there's something innate in the human experience that we know just in our bones that we are best when we work together in equitable groups where the ideas are shared, right? I just know that I could never build a pyramid myself. but you get groups of ancient Egyptians working together, and you can do marvelous things. I could never, by myself, go to space, but you get groups of high-performing people working together, and you can do all sorts of amazing feats. So graduated from that high school and went off to college and had a 20-year career in education. I taught Spanish and Mandarin and mathematics, and then ultimately was leading a school here in LA when COVID hit. And we're all going to have these stories of the snow globes of our lives just getting shaken up, and then you kind of land where you were. You as 3 years removed this month, right? We're talking to people who are just now getting back to their countries of origin, just now connecting with family members, right? Just we're starting to get a little morsel of, I won't say pre-COVID life, but something that sort of feels like, okay, this might be the new way forward. But there, right, met with muted mics and blank video feeds, trying to figure out what's happening. And it's so important to remember because it's 3 years ago. This was pre-Pfizer, pre-Moderna. We're still banging pots and pans at the end of the day to thank our essential workers. Like we had no cure. We didn't know what was happening. So I'll show you here. Here's a year and a half's worth of work by hand. Let's do this. There's a lot of files in there. So by hand, I was charting student interaction, and then from my home, scanning it and then sending it to our LMS. And it really transformed, that awareness transformed the way that we interacted as a class, and then eventually how we interacted as a school. And I'll never forget, there was a day when a really brave, powerful young woman said, Mr. Brooks, the baseball boys are only talking to each other, and if you don't do something about it, I will. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it was this really powerful moment of one, her having the courage to speak truth to power, because she was 100% right, and it was on me to listen. And then two, there's a really strong emotional connection with this awareness. Once the group saw that, in fact, the baseball boys were only talking to each other, and that class kind of sucked because we had to watch 3 people go back and forth. That wasn't engaging for anybody. Now the group had to decide, okay, once we know, what are we going to do? And once you know better, you got to do better. So from there, that was in October of 21. And then I reached out to a co-founder, and we started building and talking to 251 folks around to validate the thesis of whether or not this is, could be valuable in the market. And then from there, have just been in product development, and then eventually launched at the beginning of this year. So it's been a whirlwind, but yeah, it's been a ride, and happy to be here and happy to discuss more.
Wow, what a journey. And I think we're all clear on the why of the mission. But when you were starting to work on the idea of Harkness.ai, how did you analyze the problem? What were the particular question marks that you were trying to solve on a technical level?
Yes. So yeah. So this is a more technical crowd. So I think we can go there. Diarization is really difficult. And if you don't know, diarization is using essential natural language processing techniques to, one, identify the frequency of the human voice, and then build a classification model to say at a really low level, like the voice that you're hearing right now is in fact Jason's. The voice that you'll hear in a second is John's, and then you've got Cassandra, and then Bella. And then to train a model to be able to accurately predict that when people are sick, when people are tired, when people have just woken up in the morning and they're just going to sleep at night, when you got people at different times of our day, like I did not realize how much my voice, not even other people's voice, how much my voice changes throughout the day, and how difficult it is to train a computer to recognize, right? Because it's 8 a.m. here in California, but it's 11 there, right? Talking for 3 hours, just in terms of biology, your vocal cords change over that time, right? And then you tend towards the end of the day, you get a little bit more hoarse. So all these pieces make that problem technically quite a bit of challenge. And then after that, once we can figure out who's talking, right, through that form of diarization, and that took frankly about a year and a half to really crack that nut at a threshold that we felt comfortable with. And then once from there, then you just can transcribe what people are saying. And then from there, that's where it really gets interesting, because now you have a programmatically automated transcript. And from there, you can now start really run some interesting NLP over it to really extract insights. And some of the stuff we're finding is fascinating every single day. We're just running across new things that the world has never seen, and then we're corroborating old and really new social sciences. So we really live at the intersection of sociolinguistics, which is how people use language, social psychology, which is how groups learn, and then natural language processing. So it's really fun. And then I really want to talk to the students because, and especially those who have been socialized as women, because we are seeing and able to clarify and visualize a lot of frankly, the nonsense that people who identify as women have to deal with in society. So you talk about getting interrupted, ideas being taken, hedging conversations. When what you said was amazing, please don't hedge it, because all the guys in the room did not hedge, right? So we're able to identify, surface that data, and then reflect it back to our users so that they can grow. And this last piece is something I feel really passionate about. I'm sitting here in waterlogged California. We got, California is the best weather on the planet, but in these last 2 weeks, we've just got rain and snow and hail. And you're like, whoa, no, we don't do hail. We'll do a little rain, maybe some snow, but hail is across the line. And the climate is, in fact, changing despite all of the rhetoric. There's real problems. So to the extent that we can use the most powerful tools known to our species to solve, namely the problem of human communication, so that we can solve these larger existential problems, is something that gets me really excited. And just to put an awareness, right? At least there are 3, 4, 5 different countries represented on this Zoom call alone, which means there's at least 4 or 5 different cultures that need to be navigated when you talk about who defers to whom, right? So I grew up in a Black African-American context where I'm a 42-year-old man, and there are men and women in my life that I will only refer to as Miss Stacy, Mr. Ed. My mom would actually physically hit me if I say, hey Ed, how are you? Hey Stacy, how are you? Because in my cultural context, the way that you show respect to your elders is by saying Mr. or Mrs. Versus in other contexts I've been, you've got 5-year-olds asking 75-year-olds, hey Sarah, where's the crayons? You're like, oh, right? So these cross-cultural contexts aren't good or bad. They just are what they are. But we can use AI to sort of lubricate some of the friction at our most inflamed points, right? You just look at what's happening in Europe right now. The world is inflamed by rhetoric, and to the extent that we can use these tools to reduce some of that inflammation is something that I want to spend, frankly, the rest of my life working on. So I know it's a little bit more than you asked for, but
no, that was actually very useful and clarifying. I'm a technical person, and I tend to turn all of these problems into technical problem statement formulations and then solution approaches. But before getting into the nitty-gritty of the technical work, I'm curious. You mentioned that you came from an educational background and teaching. How did Harkness.ai build the AI expertise, and how did you build that expertise towards solving these problems?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that I get a lot, because you're like, wait, you're a teacher, and then how are you running an AI company? Wait, what happened? So 10 years ago, in 2013, I graduated from Harvard, and there I first got exposed to data science and machine learning. And if any student is on the call, I would say one of the best things that you can do when you're at university, especially in grad school, is to volunteer and get on a research team for a number of different reasons. One, it's where I first got exposed to data science, right? We were looking at conversational patterns between teachers and students. And one of the problems we were solving was essentially for Teach for America, you've got these real sort of high achieving Harvard, Princeton, Yale undergrads who go into traditionally really rough neighborhoods and then try to leverage some of their experience to teach. But what, again, it's not a problem, or it was not a problem of content. and teaching or intent. It was a problem of miscommunication, because you would have these students come in and ask a young Black boy in Camden, New Jersey, hey, do you want to read? And the kid says, I don't know how to read. The teacher would misinterpret that as he doesn't want to, he's not interested, he's a bad kid, when in fact the kid was signaling, I don't want to lose clout with my community. School, where I come from, is not cool. So I don't want to lose the social hierarchy, but if you push me just a little bit more, I will do it. So the student is asking for permission for the teacher to push him into his zone so that he can go back to his family, friends, the boys in the playground, and say like, I don't like school. Like, she made me do it. But in fact, the 5-year-old really loved school and needed that nudge. So to be able to identify those pieces, that's what we were working on. So from there, really having my hands in two different research teams. One, you get to publish, which is helpful if you're trying to go to grad school, just practically, right? And then it certainly helps on your CV to have as many early publications as possible. So just play that game. And then two, you really learn how science is done in practice, and the application is so powerful because the books that we all read and enjoy are awesome, but they're in a very sterile environment that does not necessarily reflect the grit of the human experience. So that's fantastic. And third, the last piece is that at all universities, you're going to deal with cutting edge tools. So to be able to use those cutting edge tools certainly transfer to industry. So when I graduated Harvard from there, I had, these skills and really used them in my specific school context. So there's a bunch of sort of data science problems that I was working on as a school leader, looking at flows of food at the beginning and end of months, looking at trying to model flows of food ordering, so that schools wouldn't have to waste money at the beginning, or a couple of days before Thanksgiving, or a couple of days before these big breaks, because you're wasting money. If we can reclaim and get rebate on that, what other programs could we fund? So sort of had my hand in data science, and then certainly was still in the classroom. And it wasn't until COVID it really got the push. So I was like, oh my goodness, I've really got to do this thing that I like doing, but I think the world is calling me to do this thing. So I try to keep it under wraps, but I am a card carrying nerd and data nerd at heart. And if I could just sit in a basement with, headphones and a hoodie and just kind of code all day, I would. But unfortunately, I don't get too many of those days.
Well, you're among friends and fellow nerds, and we appreciate having you here with us. So, going back to the technical process, of course, the fuel of any data science project is data, and I suspect a lot of the data that you needed for this sort of work had to come from crowdsourced audio or recorded Zoom calls and so on. Is that right?
Yes.
Were there any issues in curating the data that you needed to work with?
Yeah, good question. So I got really lucky in the fact that I was a trusted leader of a school that, kind of coming back to the story where we all kind of slid online. And short story there, I'll never forget this, March 22nd of 2020, me and my director of technology in a weekend moved the entire middle and upper school online in a weekend, right? So we're doing first, and then remember, you got to remember, from 6th graders all the way to 12th graders. So that range of user was like, oh my God, like, how do you get a 12-year-old on Zoom, and how do you get an 18-year-old not to Zoom bomb this piece? But we have to have this sort of the lowest common denominator in terms of technology. So that was wild. But one of the really great things that came out of that is because I'd built enough trust within the school community. As we recorded all of the meetings across the school, I was able to get permission from the entire school and the school community and the parents to have that as initial training set, which was magnificent for our data, because not only did I personally know the subjects, not only did I know their context, the demographic information, where they're from, how long they've been, their grades. I had all the sort of background, sort of demographic information, and then also now had their conversational data. So that was the initial data set that allowed us to test and train and build these models on. And I mean, frankly, if I did not have that, I don't know where I would have been. I would have had to partner with somebody like you all, but that was huge in terms of a clean data source, right? Because I'm sure your students know, right, garbage in, garbage out. But to have that at the beginning was I mean, you get lucky so many times on these journeys, and that was a huge stroke of luck.
Well, I completely sympathize with you in the terms of difficulty of curating the data. As we know, there is no such thing as a clean data set from the real world. So
Oh my
you're
God, yeah.
dealing with voice data from Zoom collected from different devices via different internet speeds and so on. And you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation that the tonality of the voice, the vocal tracts, resonant frequencies, and so on change. What were some of the other uncleanliness instances that you found in your data?
I will tell you the most common, and I'm slowing here because I'm trying to breathe through my frustration. Masks. When the same person spoke through a mask, it completely threw off our model. And we couldn't solve it. Like, we had to figure out, like, hey, like, you've got to, like, when you speak, take your mask off and then put it right back on, because it totally distorted that voice. That was real. You talk about a real life application that is not only ethical and moral, but also you would never expect it. You would expect, some student to kind of be messing around. You'd expect somebody to be playing. You'd expect a dog in the background. You'd expect a garbage truck. You'd expect these sort of things. But the thing that was keeping us safe was also the thing that was prohibiting us to be able to adapt to this new environment. So that was a really interesting shock. And then at a lower level, when you're cleaning those data sets, it was nice to go back to our director of admission and say, like, there's a lot of things that are wrong in your database. So there's a lot of addresses that are wrong. Do you know that you have a person in there who said that they live in Afghanistan, and that's not true. I know where they live. I know where they live, right? So data and data cleanliness and data classification is huge. Yeah, and that's its own field in and of itself, right? Data engineering is becoming more and more important as we're able to capture more and more data, because quite literally, it's just almost like the sewage system of the city, right? You're having to build the infrastructure to handle these massive flows. And I think it's so important. I think I'm in good company here, but I think it's so important for those who might be struggling with imposter syndrome, or, oh my God, tech is intimidating. It is just like everything else that we see every day and take for granted, right? So, like, glasses, like, we didn't always have those, right? That was new technology, right? That totally shifted the world, totally shifted. And at that moment of time, people are like, oh my gosh, I can see mom coming down the road. I can see my boss coming down the road. I can see the sunset. This totally changes how and where we put restaurants, how and where we put bars and dining and festivals. So it totally changes the way that folks live. But now, a couple hundred years later, we think of, oh, I lost my glasses, I'll go to Warby Park and get another pair. We're just nonchalant. In the same way, this technology, hopefully in 10, 20 years, will be just sort of endemic. It's just the lower underlying level of the way that humans interact.
Oh, that was a beautiful analogy. You mentioned the need for an infrastructure and the heavy task of cleaning the data set. Was that only you working on all of this, or did you work as part of a team?
Yeah. Yeah. So at the beginning, so again, going back to Harvard, first got exposed to data science, machine learning, kind of kept that skill set simmering. Certainly didn't let it go, but wasn't, my day to day. So then to kind of re-up, and during the pandemic, I was like, like, the world's shutting down, so I'm going to take advantage of this. So I went back to a machine learning boot camp with this explicit purpose And if you ever go to a boot camp, I would strongly suggest coming in with the project because it focuses your time and gives you a true north in terms of the application of all the wide range of projects. So like I got exposed to computer science, or excuse me, computer vision and NLP and classification and modeling and all these things, but coming in with saying like, hey, help me automate what I've been doing by hand was very clear. So from there, really got sort of reintroduced to the most cutting edge techniques, because at Harvard I was coding in R and Stata and a little Python, but more academic languages. So certainly was familiar with for loops and all the sort of the basic software engineering principles. But you always need to be upskilling and reskilling, and I think that's something that won't change, and frankly it's exciting because I've been yelling at my students my whole career, like, be lifelong learners. And I think capitalism will really force us to, otherwise you won't be able to eat. But all that to say is that in that machine learning bootcamp, really worked on it with a small team, and then once graduated from there, really refined and had to productize, because it's one thing to do a capstone, it's another thing to build an application that hundreds and thousands of users can use at a given time. So because I knew I needed so much infrastructure, reached out to I have so many crazy stories, but I think you get a lot of stories when you get older. But I reached out to a former student who my first year of teaching ever was his first year of high school. So we had known each other for 20 years. And in those 20 years, I'd gone on my journey, he'd gone on his. And it turns out he had been working at Microsoft on the Azure data infrastructure team. So I was like, oh my God, when I reached out just to kind of reconnect and see if there was any developers in the network, it turns out he was it. And he had the perfect expertise that I needed. So from me having the NLP side, we were able to build the application with the Azure and the cloud infrastructure side. And then our third co-founder has a PhD in robotics and computer vision and NLP from the University of Manchester. So that those three really came together to form the core team. Yeah.
Oh,
So
wow.
no. I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of rhetoric and idea, and I think coming back to this idea of cross-cultural communication, especially in the US where individualism is prized above all else, there's these myths of one single man or one single woman climbing the mountain and vanquishing the foe and slaying the dragon. But in fact, there's all these little nudges along the way and all these little bits of encouragement. And this isn't an easy road all the time. When people text you like, hey, I love what you're building, keep going. That's the community that gets me in front of you, but to be in front of you, literally hundreds of people are supporting me.
I actually had a different trajectory in mind. I wanted to ask how you identified different roles in your team, but the story that you told me was one of self-organization and emergent roles, which seems to be very powerful, especially in exploratory and startup projects.
Yes.
You also mentioned the challenges of turning your proof of concept into a product. Other than the scaling issues and data engineering issues, what did you wish, or what do you wish you had learned in the boot camp and the data science and data analytics program at Harvard that you had to learn yourself the hard way while doing the job?
Like ML ops, like operationalizing your models, and at the same time, model decay are. I think ML is sexy. I think it's cool. Deep learning. Everybody wants to be an MLE. Awesome. But your models will decay within a week. That means you have to constantly update and maintain these pieces, and that was way more difficult than we thought. Especially when you have batches of new data coming in, that changes the way that your application works. So I think that for me was the biggest learning curve, because people start using it and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. People start using it, but then they start using it in ways that you didn't expect or you didn't react to. And then you're like, oh my gosh. And then we're seeing this with ChatGPT as well, right? Where people are gaming it or just kind of messing with it or trying to break it on purpose. So like, for example, a very clear example is people will sometimes, when they know they're recorded, show up a different way or spam the recording. So if I say Jason, right? So like no one in a normal conversation would act like that. But if I do that to up my word count or reduce my word count, people start to act differently based on the situation, which we're not surprised, because again, social psychology teaches that situations determine how people interact. But the human is an infinitely curious being, and will always do things that you would never expect. You would never expect somebody who knew the model was trained in English but didn't want to show up, so start speaking in a whole meeting in German. Like, that's a real story, because they were like, okay, you can't pull my voice out of the model, right? In a conversation, you can't pull it out. So I'm just going to give it input that I know the model cannot interpret. And it was like, wow, that's incredibly creative use of, or I guess, hack, or adversarial attack, if you will, of AI or our models. So
Wow. I've spent my entire academic life on adversarial attacks and safety and security of AI, but it was the first time I heard this being used by school kids or people who are dealing with these helpful models online. So you released Harkness.ai as a product, and it's being used. And you mentioned uh, some of the post-deployment issues that you face, such as people trying to game the model and so on. How has the ecosystem evolved since the release of Harkness?
when you see ecosystem, tell me a little bit more, so I don't answer the
The
question that you didn't
solution
ask.
The solution in terms of the machine learning model, understanding of the problem statement, understanding of the infrastructure needs, and understanding of the user itself.
Yeah, so it's changed quite a bit, because from a product side, I'll talk about from two sides, product and then technical. So from a product side, I was really excited because, when we had this solution, it was late 2021. And I was really excited because I was like, we have an MVP here. We're still online. Let's stay. It was the fall semester of 2021. Let's stay here. This is great. We're going to deploy. We're going to do a whole ton of pilots. And then I'll never forget, there was a huge push to get back in person. And I was like, no. Can we, y'all, can we stay? Let's stay online. Everybody come back. So you watched your market kind of go back in person. And I think that was the right thing for many folks, just mental health and otherwise, it was just right for that to happen. So then we had to sort of talk to 251 customers. They're like, okay, we've got the solution that was built for online education. Education is going back in person. Like, what should we do? So that led us on a full circuitous route that actually led us back to online adult learning, because even though people wanted to be back in person, there was still a critical mass of folks who wanted to remain online. So that was, that was good for us. But then from a technical side, one of the things that I don't want to say struggled with, but we knew it was coming. We were excited to have the challenge and had to really refine our models. Was I kind of mentioned it earlier, but one of the best and coolest parts about us now living and working online is that we are really regionless and really in many ways borderless, which means that you can have people from Europe and Africa and the African continent and the US and several states in the US and Canada and Sweden, all in real time talking to each other on a call, which is magnificent for the ability for humans across the world to connect with like-minded folks. The technical problem for us is that all those people come with varying different accents, right? Which are neither good nor bad. They are just accents. So how do you find one model that can adapt and flex to all different sorts of humans speaking English? And one of the things that it was really interesting in our own reflection is that in some cases, the model was actually better at picking up accents than we were as humans. So we even as a team had to sort of investigate our assumptions about which accents would be easier to understand and which accents were harder to understand, because that is all social perception. That is not real, right? So if you say something is like, oh, some person who comes, I'm just picking on a country here, person who comes from Liechtenstein, I can't understand their accent. Their accent is so bad. Oh my God, I can't understand that. That's actually invented. That's actually prejudice and bias that is slipped into that, rather than, oh, the person with a French accent, oh, the Italian accent is so beautiful, right? That's, again, bias that is slipped into that assumption. And again, come back to social psych, humans are profoundly unaware of what we don't know and why we make decisions, right? Like you think the British, Italian, French accent is beautiful because your whole life you've been told it's beautiful. Just the same way that we think ice cream tastes good, right? There's a lot of people on the planet who think ice cream is way too sweet. Why would anybody eat that awfulness? Like, ugh, right? So the same reaction that we have to other people's food, people have to our food, and by the same token, the same reaction we have to other people's language is the same reaction they have to our language. So to be able to model 8 billion people's complexity into one model is very difficult and an ongoing challenge.
Wow. Yeah, I wouldn't think of it this way before you said it. You're right. You're trying to capture the differences of accent, voice, intonation, and so on between all possible cultures and all human beings. That's a huge challenge.
Yeah,
There's a
in English.
question from yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question from the audience, from one of our students about the mask problem. You mentioned that the mask problem turned out to be huge. Again, Jason, you are among nerds, so we are curious about the technical details. Rajib asks, how did the mask problem manifolded? Like, no, it's the flip to the story of this NLP, but did it give too many false positives, or did it make you create more fields and incorporate new scenarios and data sets? And in other words, this is my question in addition to all of these. Uh, you probably came with a solution that was at a cost. There was a trade-off in either the computing cost or the performance of your model, and then COVID went away and nobody's wearing masks. So what happened then?
That part, exactly what you said, right? So I think it's so important, and especially if you're going to work in industry, it's important to understand the business incentives and then your technical incentives. In the university or the academic setting, you can rerun a model, you can retrain it, you can redeploy, you can kind of, I mean, it's called mastery-based learning, right? We want students to do it until they really feel good. But in business, you don't have infinite resources. In fact, you have very limited resources. So to retrain a model because it's not showing up because people are wearing masks, you have to do the cost benefit. Do you educate your users to, hey, take off the mask, or do you retrain the model to be able to handle the masks? So to your point, we found it was a blip and a challenge where we had to figure out, like, oh my goodness, like, are people going to stay with masks? And our bet was that actually, no, people are not going to. Just general, there's a lot of resistance and people were very eager to get masks off as soon as possible. So we said, okay, let's not train our model, or let's not allow our model, let's not retrain it to actually have the masks in there. So we had to endure a period of low performance, which was really frustrating, because what would happen is that, right, coming back to diarization, you have one voice, the computer classifies that voice. Now with the mask, now it shows up that there's two separate speakers in a call when there in fact was one. And then users were not happy with that. So having to explain that highly technical, our model's performing low, but hey, you're still the same person even though you show up as two. Sorry, we're a startup. Like that was more of a marketing sales problem than it was for engineers, and kind of I'm still on the engineering team, having to say, like, y'all, we have to have the discipline to not look at this problem, but what's the ultimate problem. So of course, right, we say cliches like fail fast and iterate, right? Like, but those are actually real. And I say that more than anything in my Jupyter notebook, right? So it's really about, like, how do I find out quickly whether or not this thing is going to work? And then once I know it's worked, how do I make it better and better and better and better and better and better and better? So I think, yes. And then the other like sort of real technical kind of piece is that GPUs are expensive. They're very expensive. They're very, very expensive. So if you're going to deploy those resources, you should have a very, very strong business case for why you're going to do that. And I know that this is a technically minded group, but you're going to work in industry or for yourself. And just to kind of eat, you got to make sure that what you're doing and what your efforts are connected to the overall business, the outcomes and the objectives of the business. And that's a really hard pill to swallow because so many people get into data science, machine learning, and math, which, I mean, let's be honest, it's just a lot of really complex math done really quickly. So if you have a love for math, which I think we all might have, it's hard to watch the beauty and the symmetry and just the peculiarity of math just be bastardized into like a product. You're like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. But you've got to find some balance there. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. And thank you for that, Jason. There's a question from the audience about your target market. It seems that you are generally focused on educational settings, instructional avenues, and so on. But this idea has can be generalized to many, many different domains. Is that something that you're considering? And are there particular concerns that you may have about the heterogeneity of the market if you were to go beyond education?
Yep. So it's a great question. So we know that learning or education and training are the two largest and most accessible markets for us right now. And then just, again, trying to always switch it back to playbooks that work, because if you don't have to reinvent the wheel, don't reinvent the wheel, right? So we know that Amazon also started with just books, and they did books really, really, really well for years, and then expanded to some experiments with goods, most of which failed and we don't remember, right? And then it only became over time. Excuse me, speaking of voices changing. And it only became over time that, Amazon started to take more and more and more of our life. So one of the things that we had to be disciplined, because you're sitting here with a tool and you're like, oh my God, it can be applied to any human being conversation. There's 8 billion of us. Let's go. But the problem is that it can be applied to 8 billion different people. So you can go in a bunch of different directions, and then you're chasing phantoms and never actually make any progress. So we had to kind of really be disciplined and said, we are focused, laser focused in the education market on higher education and then adult online learners. Those for whom the value proposition of going back to a business school, Harvard, Stanford, Yale School of Management is not really there, because I'm not going to pay you $200,000 to walk out and make 140. Like, that's not there. So we're going to go to an online cohort-based adult online learning where I can really network with the actual 20 people that I will really know moving forward, get the same content, and then get a certificate that allows me to switch careers. So we knew that that was also happening. So let's really focus and become the default tool in that market. The second market that we're going after is the training market. So companies will spend millions of dollars training their associates to perform at a certain standard. So one of the folks that we've been talking to is Build-A-Bear, for example. And for those of you who don't know, they make really plush, amazing bears that people usually buy at really critical, highly emotional moments in their lives. So like a passing of a loved one, someone gets cancer, a major celebration. So really memorable moments that you don't want to mess up. So they invest a lot of training into their associates. They have zero feedback on how well that training goes, which means after investing all this money, they kind of close their eyes, wish, hope, and cross their fingers that these associates walk on the floor and have a great day. So if you can't have a bad day working there. So they're using our technology to measure the efficacy of training modules, so they can identify, okay, who needs another round in this module, who needs the opportunity to practice, who needs I'll show you here, do a bit of a demo. right? So some of, especially in the training space, just pay attention to what happens in your body when you hear my voice, but you see this figure. What assumptions do you make about where I come from, who my partner is, what my children might look like? If I came to you at a store, how would you serve me? How would this person change the way that you feel? What happens with this person? Right. So really, again, using the most powerful tools to be able to simulate these conversations so that we can make the mistakes here in a safe learning environment rather than on real people who have real lives who are affected by these things, right? How many people have talked to somebody who looks like this, right? And then how many of us have spoken to a person who looks like this, right? This person walks into your store asking for a bear, and then the associate says, "What's that thing on your head?" Oof, that is something that I do not want, right? I even saw it in your reaction, right? There's a really strong emotional reaction when you, again, it's going to come back to sociolinguistics. It's going to come back to cross-cultural communication. Like, how do we use these tools to mitigate the friction that happens at the seams of our cultures and societies, right? So that's just sort of a quick use case of that technology. So.
Wow. I'm a little in awe of how beautifully that weaved into the conversation. And thank you for that, Jason. I've been asking a lot of my own questions. Before we move towards the final segment of this conversation, I first want to ask if Ardiana has any questions that I haven't asked yet. Dr. Sula?
Yeah, Jason, you just touched a little bit on the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how Harkness' mission is building around that, or what is your vision to kind of contribute more to the companies and their DEI mission?
Sure, that's a great question, and I have two very strong opinions on it. The first is that we do not, and I refuse to be categorized as just a DEI tool, because that profoundly limits the way that you look at the problem, and profoundly limits and is really, frankly, a American-centric view of the problem, right? So because of America's history, there's certain outcomes, certain people are treated certain ways, and certain people are mistreated in other ways. So then 400 years later, we have to come up with this diversity, equity, inclusion to now sort of retroactively try to solve these problems. It's a limited scope, and it's certainly a problem that our technology can handle. But what I'm more interested in is, what does it look like, just like glasses, just like electricity, just like a mirror, change the way I perceive myself, change the way I presented myself, made me aware of the fact that I've got dirt on my head, made me aware of the fact that I've got mustard on my face. And then now I change the way I look, and then I increase my chances of finding a mate, and increasing my chances of finding a better job, et cetera, et cetera. How can we use that to not only to reflect back to you within the team context? Here's the best version of yourself. And in fact, the best version of yourself is one who is inclusive of people, who sees through, who sees the best in other people and pulls that out, who actually lives at a higher, I don't want to sound too woo here, but lives at a higher frequency, because we can see the humanity in us all. And that's the best part of this job, is that the most cutting edge technology is bringing us back to evolution. Namely, that through a series of grunts, which languages, and gesture, we navigate communication. So I could go to Moscow tomorrow. I don't speak any Russian. I can say good morning, dobro utro, right? And then after that, I get into really, really big trouble because I don't know anything. But I could eat. I could find a place to live. I could probably find somebody who speaks English, because I could either gesture or mumble my way through that. I could human brute force my way through that. And what we're trying to do is pull and connect our humanity at a much deeper level, because too many, and I've experienced this my whole life, having gone to these schools, like, here's a brochure, you want to be in it? It's like, no, I don't want to be in a brochure. I want to be treated with respect and dignity, just the same way I want to treat you with respect and dignity. So DEI is more of a checkbox. Hey, are we not racist? Are we not sexist? Are we not this? Are we not that? That's actually like a less inspiring vision than can we be fully maximized humans. That's what I want to be. I really want to communicate with other people at a human level, and just by modeling how we're talking to each other, patterns of turn taking, tone and inflection, we can get to that deeper evolutionary state, which means that now we can bond groups better. And once we, and this is something that's really cool because we see it. And again, I always want to bounce it between environments, but we see one of the things that militaries across the world do really well is bond a really disparate group of people together, right? Through drills. That's why you cut the hair off, through uniform, through these really sort of intense emotional experiences. Like we're all going to shoot a gun together. You're going to remember that day, right? You're going to remember the people that you did that with, right? You see the same thing with football clubs and sports clubs where you don't practice. You go away to camp, you practice, and then you come back. So it's like these really bonding pieces. So like, how can we use those similar psychological principles in these online environments? So I hope that answers your question.
No, thank you. I totally agree, because people can look, we can be 5 people that look exactly like me, right? But how to respect and, just be respectful of the thought, of the opinions that we express, and hearing everybody and listening to everybody, it seems very, very important. Thank you.
Right. Of course.
We're coming to the final moments of our time with you, Jason, and that makes me really sad because this has been a wonderful conversation and I really don't want it to end soon. But we have a wonderful question that I think can be a good segue towards the end of this conversation. GOTR, MS Data Science student asks, you've been talking to end users and educators and schools and instructional organizations and so on about the use of AI in solving this particular problem. What were some of the biggest misconceptions of the people you've been talking to about AI and its power? And how did you address those misconceptions?
Yep. I think we've seen it with the advent of ChatGPT. Like if my 74-year-old dad is talking about AI and the robots are going to take over and all this stuff, I think it's fair to say that there's a high level of consciousness about AI, and with that comes a high level of anxiety. Because if you look back at human history, any time one group of people had a set of tools that another group of people did not have, we've only historically seen exploitation. If you think back to gunpowder and guns, if you think about electricity, if you think about access to planes, just any new technology. So there's a lot of, rightfully so, there's a lot of anxiety. So to the extent that us as practitioners can, one, really prioritize ethics, and then 2, explainability, and then just be unwavering and uncompromising on trust. Those are the barriers that are going to keep us. If we're not able to use these tools, it'll be because of one of those reasons, if not multiple. So it's important that for folks who know that use our platform, like, here's our data privacy policy, and here's what we're into. We actually don't care about your conversations. They're not as interesting as you think they are, but what we really care about is how you're interacting with each other, and that's the value that we can deliver as a company. And I think being crystal clear on that from everybody from the top to the bottom, that's of the utmost importance, because not to pick on anybody, but certainly to challenge tech companies 101. There's a really strong, very small, incredibly homogenous group of people, mostly who studied CS at Stanford, and they come from a very, very small specific background, kind of develop these tools, and then because of their libertarian bent said, you guys just figure it out, right? And then when you just unleash these tools on society, they had an effect, and these tools were really helpful in connecting to a lot of people, but also really caused damage that we are now having to clean up. So as I step in, this is one of the really many reasons that I wanted to step into leading a company in this space is because I want to do it a different way. Like we know the story of people using AI and technology to exploit. We know that story of people using AI and technology to generate revenue. We know the story of people using AI and technology to kind of take over the world, but we don't know the story of people using technology to seek the flourishing of other human beings. And that to me is the most exciting, because if we can crack that nut, we all win, right? If every engineer who's working on climate change can communicate better, you know what happens? We all as a species can live a little bit longer, right? If every engineer who's working on political discourse or racial inequality or whatever the problem you're passionate about, if they can communicate better, we'll be able to solve that. So my charge to this group would be, use the technical problems to solve the human problems, because we've been taught this false dichotomy. Because you go to school, you go to English class and science class and math class and history class and language class, we've taught that they're siloed. That's not true. And I can prove it to you, because if you look at any of Leonardo da Vinci's, any of the Renaissance artists, any of the African mathematicians, any of the Persian and the Arabic, Middle Eastern and Arabic speaking mathematicians, right? All of their work blended art and science and math and biology in ways that we've just been conditioned to think that they're separate. They're not separate. To be human is to have a seamless experience that goes from in the morning marveling at a butterfly to solving a really hard technical problem to negotiating where you're going to go to dinner with your spouse. All of that is intersectional. All of that is interdisciplinary. And to the extent that we can master these skills to be able to solve problems, I mean, that's what it's going to be a human in the age of AI.
I think that's a wonderful thought to end this conversation on. Jason, this has been an inspirational conversation and time, both for me and hopefully for the students and colleagues who are on this call. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We'll be following the growth and evolution of Harkness.ai, and we are really happy that we got to hear from you, learn from you, and get inspiration from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Sula, for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's always kind of, I learn a lot when I hear from Harkness.ai and you. So it's a great mission, and it speaks directly to our students and, the doing good in society. That's what our end mission is here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we'll see our audience again in our next round of speaker and conversation series, which will be announced shortly. Jason, thank you again. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.